A guys, the Power 5 conference has a playoff of only 4 schools. They're talking about expanding that to 12. If that happens, there'll be a lot more revenue that will come down to the rest of us as a result of that. So that actually could happen a little sooner, but we forecasted it here, as you see, out in 26 or 27, 28. That gives you your total revenue there then of $1,069,000. Now we get into the expenses as a result of moving up to FBS football. First two, particularly the first one, is salaries and compensation. Let me explain that a little bit to you. Right now, our current contract with our head football coach says if we move up to FBS, he's entitled to an increase based on the median salaries of the other football coaches in the Sun Belt. Okay? That's about $250,000. We're going to spread that over 3 years. We do not have to do that all at one time. The other thing is the assistant coaches. If you're going to move up to the next level, then you're competing with those schools and the assistant coaches and what they pay them, and so we need to do an adjustment for the assistant coaches, and that's about $378,000. And then finally, when you step up to the next level of football, you're allowed to hire 3 additional football coaches. And our performance shows doing that, but we'd add 1 a year for the next 3 years. And then if you'll follow that out, you'll see we start to level off with salaries and benefits because we're not having to deal with those salary adjustments for the head coach or for additional coaches or additional salaries for the assistant coaches. Next is scholarships. Big number, important number here because when you step up to FBS, you are allowed to offer 22 more scholarships than where we currently are. So the dollars you see there are tied to scholarship dollars. Now what we're doing here is we're not doing all that in 1 year. And again, if you'll look across, you'll see we're phasing that over a 3-year period. No school wants to go out and award 22 new scholarships at one time. You want to spread that because you don't want all 22 of them graduating the same year. So we've accounted for it over a 3-year period. Next is sports operations. That's just the total cost of all of our sports, not just football, all of our sports when we step up to the Sun Belt. It is a combination of things like we've estimated an increase in health insurance every year, salary increases every other year, an inflation of 2%. But the big number there is travel. There's additional travel by moving into this conference for all sports, and that's a little over $1 million. Next, you see guarantees. No money for the first 2 years because we've locked in with our football schedule now, so there's no additional dollars there. But you can see as we get out, there's additional dollars there because we'll have to pay some schools to come play in Harrisonburg because you're allowed to play 1 FCS school a year. Just like now, we go to Chapel Hill or to Tech. And we get paid to do that. We're going to have to be in the same situation when that happens when we move up. The next number is an important number, $600,000 deduction. Everybody see that? The reason that number's there is where we are now in FCS, we compete in football in a playoff system. And as you know, we've been very successful in that. Been to the national championship and won it several times. Been there for 4 out of the last 5 years, I believe. But people believe that you're in the playoffs, that you're making a lot of money. That's not the case at our level. We actually lose about $600,000 a year if we make a run in the FCS. The only monies we get from the NCAA is they give you some travel money if you are traveling to another school or you're traveling to the national championship. So this is actually going to be a savings for us if we move up to FBS because in the conference we're moving to, it's a bowl. They have 5 bowls that they're contracted with, and the conference helps tremendously with the travel costs and the cost of going to a bowl. So this is actually a savings for us by making this decision. And then you have it's a number of things there. These conference officials were paying more. The agency service charge goes up because your agency service charge is based on your total expenditures. And there's also a reflection of the fact we have a shoe contract and a clothing contract with Nike, and the NCAA makes you count for it as revenue in the top and as an expenditure, so it's really a wash. Okay, you see then your total expenses and revenues. Our we take the institutional amount that we plan on spending from the student fee, add to that the new revenues that I've just talked about, $11 million, that brings you to a total of $66 million. Then you take your institutional support and you do the deductions again. And I'm not going to go through those all again. They're the same. They're very similar in cost. You do the division, and you can see there we're at 57%. So we started that, getting toward that 55. Now, if you go back to the top of the page again, and I promise you, we're not going through all these columns, okay? I promise you. But what I want to point out to you is if you look at the end of that second year of transition and you go to the next year, you're starting to see the revenues really pick up. And you see the expenses starting to level out down below. And you look at the bottom where we've done our calculations, and in 27, 28, we're at actually 54.2% and drop a little bit more the following year. So that's how we would propose that we would meet the Cox legislation of 55%. A similar approach was done when Old Dominion University moved up. There was language in the bill that allowed them to actually do this phase-in. Quite frankly, there's no way you could ever jump straight and not have a transition period because of the 2 years that the NCAA requires you to go through and because of the fact that it takes a while to get your revenues coming in to offset your expenses. I'll stop there and see if any of you got any questions, or I can go through all these columns if you like and talk about the same thing over and over again, but I don't think that's what any of you want.
Commission members, any questions?
Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair.
Senator Dees.
Charlie, how big's your stadium?
We see 25,000.
And is that big enough for?
Yeah, the minimum for FBS is 15,000, so we're fine there. When we rebuilt that stadium, Craig, you may remember a couple years ago, we designed it to where we can add on to it at any point, but we don't see the need to do that anytime soon.
Delegate Ferris.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I'm not disputing these figures, but I just can't hardly believe that the expenses would stay the same in the next 6 years, even with the, given inflation and things of that nature. Do you have an explanation for how they would stay so close to the same?
Well, as I mentioned, in our pro forma, what we used is some inflation of 2%. We used salary increases every other year. And we've tried to do our best of estimating what we think those expenses will be. Our budget right now is fairly large for an FCS school. So we think from that standpoint, if you just take our base budget now, we've got a pretty good base to cover our athletic costs. This is just new expenses associated with FBS. It doesn't talk about all the other sports, which we've already got built in our base because we compete at Division I level there now. Now, Mr. Delegate, you raise a valid point. Our assumptions could be wrong on some of these things. And the way the Cox bill deals with that, the Cox bill does not say you cannot raise your student fees. It simply says that if you exceed these percentages, then you must raise through other outside revenue, other athletic revenue, to offset whatever your student fee may go up, which would then account for us maybe having to raise our fees a little bit more because our expenses, we missed some of these assumptions. We matched this budget up with the other schools in the Sun Belt, and we're right in line with where they are.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any other questions from the commission members? If not, staff, give us our direction, please.
Mr. Chairman, if the commission is inclined, if there are no more questions, the only next thing would be is that if there's agreement that this is reasonable to move forward with, you would need 3 of the 4 House members and 2 of the 3 Senate members to agree, and you would just make a motion to that end, and they could move forward.
Yes, Tony, thank you. But before we do that, on our agenda, we do have an opportunity for public comments, and I think I want to recognize the president of Old Dominion University, President Hemphill.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. We really appreciate the opportunity to be here. Thank you for the opportunity to allow me to speak on behalf of JMU. First, I'd like to take the opportunity to acknowledge John, as well as our athletic director, Jeff Bourne. Good to see both of you gentlemen again. In recent weeks, there's been a lot of discussion as it relates to student athletics, literally all across the country, as we've had a lot of movement, to say the least, in terms of conference movement. And I can tell you that a lot of due diligence, time, and energy has gone into this decision that brings JMU before you today. I guess when we think about the best of the welfare of our student athletes, when we think about academically and athletically what they need, a lot of great discussion. I know that they've put tremendous hours and time into this discussion. When we think about the stakeholders, the faculty, the staff, the students, and everyone on social media who has an opinion. A lot of dialogue, to say the least, and also the required approvals to allow them to be here today. I can personally attest to the amount of time and energy that goes into this, and recently with ODU making the decision to move from Conference USA to the Sun Belt, because we went through this same conversation with our entire community. And I can say that I come before you today as a colleague and hopefully a competitor of JMU very, very soon. So I stand before you this morning to share that ODU is in full support of JMU being able to make this move from FCS to FBS. We could not be more excited to have them join the Sun Belt Conference. And I would say for both ODU and JMU, having the regional competitor in terms of when we think about travel, what we think about for our student athletes, for our fans, it will mean a great deal. And just a little note that I really need to share, the last matchup between ODU and JMU was on November 17th, 2012 in football, in Harrisonburg, if I'm not mistaken, right? And I think the Monarchs won that game. Sorry, John. Had to mention that. In all seriousness, this will provide a greater level of scholarship support for student athletes, as you heard Charlie mention. This will reignite, if you will, in-state competitive games between basketball, football, all of our sports, but also less wear and tear on our student athletes as well as our coaches, and really less of missed class time, because we made this decision thinking very much about having athletes travel over 2,000 miles to Texas, what this would mean for us truly having an Eastern Division that's made up of some of the schools that were shared earlier. So I say to each of you here today that this move to the FBS division and the Sun Belt is one that was a very easy decision for ODU, and I would say the same probably holds true for JMU as well. So at the end of the day, both ODU and JMU are very much sharply focused on our students' experience in the classroom as well as in life. And I can tell you, having the opportunity to spend time with the commissioner of the Sun Belt, Keith Gill, he's very much aligned in the way that we think about the importance of this for our student athletes, the same philosophy. So again, thank you for the opportunity to allow me to be before you today and share ODU's full support for JMU joining what is the Sun Belt Conference and moving up to FBS. So thank you, members of the committee.
Thank you, Mr. President. Any other public comments in favor of this request? Okay. Any public comments in opposition? Let me just state before we take our vote, I think it's a great opportunity for James Madison University, but I do want to share this with you. And Mr. President, this is extremely important to me. Families and the cost of college education is extremely expensive. And I certainly hope that as you guys make this move, that it does not become a burden for your students, and that the students will not have to bear the burden and the cost of this transition. I'm excited for the university, but please do not lay the burden of the cost of this transition on the student body. Thank you. Tony, we're going to do a vote, and what I'm going to ask is that I'm going to call the roll and ask members to vote in the affirmative or in opposition. I'll start with our vice chair.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes,
I wondered if,
Delegate Carr.
as we move forward on the motion, I wondered if we could consider 3 suggestions. And
Delegate Carr.
thank you. Move that the APA, when performing its annual evaluation under Code 23.1-1309, take into consideration that JMU will be under an initial probationary 2-year period with the Sun Belt and adjust accordingly. And our second suggestion would be that we move that the General Assembly provide language in the upcoming budget to provide JMU the same transition period as ODU in the enabling legislation when it moved to Division 1A football. And the third suggestion be that the expectation that JMU will focus on minimizing the impact on student fees that could result from this move, as you mentioned, sir.
Okay, commission members, just a voice vote if you're in favor of those recommendations. Please use the vote sign of aye.
Aye.
All right. Now, Tony, I think we're in position to make a motion. Okay.
So moved. I make that motion, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. It has been moved and seconded that we accept and receive the recommendation from JMU. We will do I want a voice vote, but I will call the roll for so that this vote will be recorded. We'll start with Vice Chair Sasslaw. Senator Vogler.
Aye.
Senator Dees.
Aye.
Delegate Carr.
Aye.
Delegate McQuinn.
Aye.
Delegate Ferris. Aye. The chair votes aye. Tony? Well, congratulations, Mr. President, and this concludes the purpose of our meeting. We're adjourned.